what you see up here, this wood here, is about a quarter of what they tap.
Okay.
3/4 of it is down the road. If you go towards Attica, you can look for white, big cans, like big, huge gas, gas pump cans. That's where they store it. Then they take this truck up and they get the sap from that and bring it down here, and they're putting it into the tank right now.
I saw that pull in.
So about a quarter of it, they have dug lines underground, and the lines get bigger and bigger and bigger until they come into the sap house. So that saves a lot. They don't have to use the truck to get those.
Yeah.
So that's only about a quarter of the line.
Wow.
Come on over here. This is one of the trees that are up there. This is one of the larger trees, and they tend to be more towards the top of the hill. But in a tree of this size, probably can put 3 taps, but normally a tree of this size will only put 1. But you can see how many times this has been tapped.
Oh, those are the tap marks.
Up to here, they hadn't been trapped at all. That's probably the first 100 years, maybe 180 years old tree.
Wow.
And the ones that are closest to the edge, like over here, are the latest ones. And if you look closer, you can tell, like, this is smaller than this, because we've learned to use smaller and smaller taps, smaller and smaller drills, and we get just as much sap out, even though they're smaller.
Without doing as much damage.
And then we
to the
aren't
tree.
doing as much damage to the tree.
Wow. Well, that's a good thing.
Obviously healed.
Yeah, it did heal. That's amazing.
Well, I would say this tree probably was started in the 1830s. It was probably cut down about 2013.
We're going to let them go ahead because we've been on the school before.
Come on over here so that more people come, we can accommodate this.
Yeah.
So, we have a team of about 6 that go up in the woods. 3 of them are tappers and 3 of them are drillers. So the tapper will put this over their shoulder, carry this in case they have to do any repairing of the line. And they also will carry a vest like that that has all of the equipment that they may need in the pocket. We'll also put this on their wrist, and so that their hands are free. And then now it's not like today, there's ice and snow and everything else up there. So they have to grab a hold of roots and trees and everything to pull themselves up. We'll go up to a tree. Now this has a lot of holes in it because we're just using it for demonstration. But the driller will take the drill and drill a hole, and we're using smaller and smaller bits now, and smaller spokes. The reason is we can get just as much sap out, but it does less damage to the tree.
Yeah.
So these lines are up there. Have you been on the wagon?
No.
Oh, okay. If you take the wagon leg, you'll see all these blue tubes up in the woods. And right now they're in the tree, but pretty soon they're going to go up and take all those out. You come up to a tree, the tapper, 1, 2 taps, and it's in, and then the sap begins to run. Now, if that looks like water, it's because it's 98% water. This is what comes out of the tree. This is the sap. It has maybe 1.5 to 2% sweetness to it. We think what happened in the days gone by, an Indian took their hatchet or tomahawk or whatever, put it in the tree, scarred the tree, and all of a sudden the sap began to run off the handle, and they put it in their mouth and said, "Oh, this is sweet. Maybe I can use this on my cereal." The Indians use it on I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Anyway,
Anything in that.
so
Yeah, right.
then when they boiled it, they found out that they could get more sweetness. So that's where maple syrup probably came from.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
We
probably.
think. We think.
That's
Nobody
what-
knows.
That's what they're told by the elders too.
Yep, that's right.
So after you put that in like that, where does that?
It
how do you
goes
collect
into the tube, into larger and larger tubes, and a
Oh.
quarter of it comes into the sap house, and I'll show you the tubes where it comes in, and you can see it running in.
I wonder
Now-
if you plug that or something until you needed it. I
No,
didn't know
no,
how
you can't do
did.
that because it's like your skin. You know, you have a scab, you may have a scar, but the skin will regrow, so does it on a tree.
Okay,
So after about 6 weeks, you're not gonna get any more sap out of it.
interesting.
So, when do you start tapping? Well, that's a good question.
Depends on the weather.
If you, it depends on the weather, and sometimes Lyle starts in December. And you know you can have cold weather the whole month of December, and then you gotta draw another hole because you got nothing.
So you want
So
to be sure.
it's an educated
Yeah.
guess is when you start.
Okay.
And usually he'll do some in December, some in February, some in March. You may have to go back and redo some.
You probably were able to do that this year, huh? Because it was.
Well, I don't know, but what he hasn't done that. But now it's getting, if you listen to the weather, the next week it's gonna have warm days and nights. And we'll probably see the leaves start coming out. And as soon as the leaves come out, you're done.
Yeah, it's pretty short.
Oh, didn't know
When
that
you're
either.
done, you have to go back through and pull 20,000 of these out of the tree. And
Oh, wow.
you have to wash this down.
Yeah, I guess.
And
you
they used to
have
use Clorox, but they found out there's a little bit of salt in the Clorox and the animals love it.
Oh.
And even if you don't, you have that sweetness in there and the animals love that.
Okay.
So you gotta clean them out. When you
Quite
drill
an
a hole,
operation. Yeah.
you try to drill a place where the hole hasn't been drilled before. But it's not easy to find that because if you look at the bark, you can't always see where the holes have been 3 and 4 years ago. But if you looked on the inside of the tree, you'd be able to see, but you can't do that. So it's an educated guess again as to where you drill. You try not to drill up here or down here because there's scars from where you drill, and you won't get as much sap.
Wow.
So again, it's a guess. A lot of these things are educated guesses.
Oh, okay.
This is a tree, much like the one out there, that was very large, started probably in 1834. They counted the rings. It was cut down in 2013. So then somebody that was a history buff put a marker here for all the different years, the different things in the states that happened.
Wow. Spanish American.
So
Yeah.
we're going to go into the next room, which is a very noisy room, so I'm not going to do a lot of talking there. But you'll be able to see the tubing where it comes in, the sap comes in, it's running today, it goes into a collector, and then through filters. And we'll see that, and then we'll move up the stairs and where I can talk a little easier. The reason that it's noisy in there is because it's a vacuum pump. What we found is if we put a vacuum on the lines, we can pull more sap out of the tree and not do any damage to the tree.
Oh, good.
Okay?
Out of the
So
existing
years
ones.
ago, we used to put a lot of taps on one line because when the sap came out from one, it created a vacuum above it. So they figured, well, if that works, why not put a vacuum on the line? As soon as we did that, we collapsed the tank.
Oh.
We had to get a different tank that was stronger to take the vacuum.
Wow.
But it was well worthwhile because we got more sap. So this will be very noisy room. Watch the stairs.
Okay.
And over here you can see they extract it.
Wow.
Then it goes through these filters. He's taking the top off this filter. This goes in those filters, takes some of the impurities off. But the longer the sap stays in the line, the more bacteria accumulate. So, we have an ultraviolet light filter here. That takes about 99% of the bacteria out of the line. And that's the vacuum pump. We'll go up and around to the left. Now I can talk a little easier.
The door. Does he want us to follow him? Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than you think. Run over to here, and I'll give everybody a tour. Okay, I told you that they put vacuum on the line.
Yeah.
Well, that creates another problem though. Supposing the vacuum pump begins to run like crazy, means that there's a leak someplace. There's 30 lines up there. You have to travel all 30 lines to find out where the leak is. Well, there was a college student that stayed here one year in spring. He said, that's for the birds. He said, I'm going to get a meter put around the top of every line, all 30, that shows me what the vacuum is from up there. Put it on his phone, put it on Wi-Fi. He can sit in college, look at his phone, and say, oh, they lost vacuum in line 12. Well, Royal and say, get your butt up there, you need to go up line 12. So when he looks at his phone, this is what it means. Notice this is red. That means there's probably a problem someplace. But you only have to go up one line to find it. We're all down here, so nobody's finding it. But it not only tells us what the vacuum is, it also tells us what the temperature of the sap coming out of the tree is. I couldn't even turn this on. My grandkids had to come and tell me how to turn it on.
Yeah.
Now these tanks are, I'll tell you more about that, but notice the water coming out of it, but I'll tell you why.
Okay.
See these tanks here? These are all a different kind of filter. Come on around the front and I'll show you. If you've ever been on an ocean-going vessel, you know that they can take in salt water and get rid of the brine and have drinking water. What you see over here is drinking water. The reason is it's taking the sap, pulled off under pressure with a reverse osmosis machine, which is now running. And what it's doing is sorting out and pressuring the water through, getting rid of the water, and raising the concentrate of sweetness in the sap. So we're going from maybe 1.5 to 2% sugar to now, or sweetness, to maybe 25%. So it's a higher concentrate of sugar, of sweetness really. So this is called a reverse osmosis machine, or we call it an RO. The trade-off is you gotta buy the machine.
Just imagine what that costs.
I have no idea. And look at this tray, it's out of the evaporator. I'll tell you why the tray is sitting there. When we get in here, it's easier to talk.
Taking off my notification.
Now pull that close. That tray that's there is a tray, one of the trays out of this evaporator over here. You know, if you put water on the stove and boil it, you get a residue in the pan.
Yeah.
Well, you can imagine what it is when it's sticky.
Uh-huh.
And you can imagine what it is to clean it.
Yeah.
So Lyle devised this system. He brings the pans in here. He puts a cover on. On the cover is what you call a sprinkler. For doing your lawn. Takes vinegar and water, runs that. It's like a dishwasher. It cleans the pan out.
Boy.
The nice thing about Lyle is when he finds something like the RO or tubing or the cleaning of the pan, he shares it with all the other growers. He doesn't patent it and keep it to himself.
Everybody's in the same place.
Yeah, everybody's in the same boat and everybody's
nice.
trying to
That's
learn.
a Merle.
Yep, that's a Merle.
Yeah.
Well, you
Okay.
gotta keep it all together, or you lose your piece.
Oh yeah, sure. Yep. Keep a lot of friends that way too. This is the evaporator. So now everything up to this point can run by itself. 24 hours a day, you don't have to be here. But the evaporator, Lyle has to be here because you do not want to burn the syrup when it comes, the sap when it becomes syrup. And it's very easy to do it. Because if you do, you got to take all those pans out, you got to clean the pans,
And you lose.
And you lose it all.
lose all of what you've done up to this point. So everything is hot in here that's bright silver, or most of the things, a lot of the things. So don't put your hand on anything that is silver. But there is a pad around the window that you can look in and see the evaporation process. The way at the end, you'll see a pipe and the syrup is coming out that pipe. They now have a computer that tells them when the density is correct to pull it off and to run it across through the filters and into pails, or into the 55-gallon barrel. What I like to tell people is, when it gets towards the end of the year, and the sap coming out of the trees, sugar content isn't so high, and so you have less sugar content, you have to boil longer, it gets darker and darker and darker. When it gets too dark, then they put it in barrels and sell it to Vermont. You know the other side of that story, don't you? The places that make the Aunt Jemima syrup, all the commercial syrup, are in Vermont, and you have to have a little bit of real syrup in it. However, if you know people from Vermont, you don't have to tell them the second part, and you won't be lying, because the first part is true. They do barrel and sell it to Vermont.
I'll let you know if you buy
But you know the
Yeah.
you know the rest of the
If
story.
you buy maple syrup up in Wyoming, it's our local syrup.
Well, they've lost the contract
Lost the
now.
contract?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, different places. Wegmans' policy is to share it around to other growers.
Yeah.
Which they had it for 7 or 8 years,
It's a
so
good thing.
it was a good thing. But this was a tough year to lose the contract.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
they didn't have any fairs and they didn't have
Yeah.
Maple Weekend last
Everybody
year.
got hurt.
Everybody had problems.
But did you
So-
pick up anybody? Like,
Pardon?
did you pick up any other, like,
Well,
shots?
fortunately, Lyle's wife is his first wife, but this is her second marriage. Her first husband died. And she was secretary to the president of Fisher Price. So she has a lot of connections.
Yes.
And when she came and married him, she came here, lost her salary, of course, and now is working for nothing. But she's got a lot of contacts, so along the thruway you'll find Merle. Premier Liquor carries Merle. A lot of places now carry because Dottie has been very good at seeking out markets.
Networking. Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, these barrels, some of them may be, oh, that's cool. All right. Watch these, look into the evaporator. This is hot water that's coming off the evaporator. But over here is where the syrup is coming out. And that is checked with computer to tell when the density is right but they also can check it with a hygrometer and tell when it's right. Then it's brought across through the filter into the cans and barrels, and they'll take it across the street. And the barrels are served for what they used to be called a There you go. This is Lyle. I caught Lyle napping this morning, even though there was a whole bunch of people here. But he was here till midnight last night boiling. Got up at 3 and came down and boiled again. So he deserves a little nap.
Well, it's a time-sensitive business.
Oh, it is. And you don't want to let it burn. Sure. So this is Lyle. Any questions you want to ask?
Gosh,
You can do that. Okay?
you got a lot on your plate back here, huh?
And this tells us, this is temperature, right? Right here, there's the dial. Part of the reason he's sitting here is to keep an eye on that. Okay?
Thank you.
Very good.
Yes, thank you.
All righty. Have a good time.